Hi, Alexa. Thank you so much for
Hi.
coming on Project Next Play.
Betcha. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So the way that we've been opening up the show is with a question like, when you were little, was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
So I don't know if I had a set, like, I want to be a doctor or an astronaut or anything that I'm sure is probably weird. Didn't have that, but I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. So I definitely watched my father like start and run his business. And I think I knew I always kind of wanted to work for myself in some capacity, but ultimately be happy and have balance. And also have a family. So be a mom and be able to do all the stuff that comes along with that.
So you didn't want to be a professional women's basketball player?
No, I did not actually. I don't know if I ever it's funny, I ended up getting obviously to one of the highest levels that you can, at least collegiately for that, but it's funny, all the stuff that kind of kept me engaged and motivated in the sport, it wasn't necessarily always the accolades, it was all of this kind of wraparound elements of the sport that I loved. Like, I loved competing, I loved being able to push myself and achieve new levels that I didn't think I could previously, the community and the friendships and the coaching relationships, like all of those pieces, I think were very addictive to me. But then it wasn't necessarily like, I want to go play in the WNBA. It was more of like, I want more of this. Like, I want to keep feeling this more.
Yeah. Less of like the sport and more what the sport had to offer. Do you think like
hmm
they could have kind of been any sport? Or were there other sports, but basketball was the one you just excelled at?
That's a great question. Think that maybe there could have been other ones. To be honest with you, I wasn't very good at a lot of the other ones. I know a podcast, like audio or video, doesn't lend itself to it, but like I'm tall, so I'm 6'2". Uh, and I played things like field hockey, but I basically broke my back doing that because I couldn't
No.
it's like so you're hunched over the whole time. So I think maybe, but ultimately I think my athletic ability and just kind of like those things led me to basketball, but maybe, who knows? I don't know.
That's pretty cool. I saw that you were the Miss Basketball for Maine and all those things. So you were incredibly successful at it. And it's nice to hear that it wasn't necessarily just to excel or get to, a means of the end that was like a professional within the sport. It was more about, it sounds like from a young age, like a holistic experience.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely became my entire life, and it also became a lot of how people knew me or kind of bucketed me, but I personally have always felt like it was bigger than just trying to get to some level or get to some recognition. Yeah, but I also was really lucky to have coaches that at an early age, like, modeled that and, kind of instilled that in me too.
Yeah. You mentioned growing up in a family of entrepreneurs. What sort of entrepreneurs? What was that like?
Yeah. So my dad started a company with his family that was in actually like the alcohol brand building business. So they manufactured and sold a bunch of brands you might know, like Three Olives and Pinnacles and all that stuff in Maine. So they started that business. It was super small and then grew it to, national recognition, which was huge. So I got to watch a lot of that. And then my mom started her own boutique shop in our town. So she, got the space, stood up the space, got all the inventory. She has a background in a lot of like merchandising planning. So watching her run a retail location I'd go and hang out in like the back room when she was setting it all up and helped her paint the walls and all those things. So both of them had that spirit, but it was expressed very differently. But we had dinner together every night, and it's usually where the conversation ended up going.
So from a young age, you were learning about starting businesses and what that was like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I I think so. Without knowing it then, but yeah.
It looked like when you were in college, you even were a co-founder of a business.
Yeah, it actually was at the end of high school. So we had this really awesome teacher, and he taught it was actually a history course, but he signed us up with one of the local towns. They were having a competition to revitalize their downtown area. It was an old mill town, and they were giving out shop locations, so like storefront locations to the best business plans. And so a couple of the other students in my class, we applied and we set up the concept was to bring farm fresh produce and products into really just having like a fresh market. And so we did that senior year, I think, which was really funny. So we ran it for a semester or two. But yeah, it was neat. It was a lot, but it was really fun.
So
hmm
is that still like an active business?
I don't think so. I
No?
think when we graduated, it kind of got rolled up. But I mean, it was an amazing experience. And I think like that teachers that it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So the way I know you is, I guess we both went to Boston College together and were athletes
hmm
there. And so when you mentioned, I think basketball was a big part of how people knew you, that's really kind of the context I had for you.
hmm
But it sounds like from a young age, you were interested in so many different things. You mentioned the family being entrepreneurial. Was there anything else that went into just like having a really diverse set of interests?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and my grandmother was a teacher, and my grandfather was a blacksmith. So, one is kind of pretty well known career track in teaching, but she, I think, taught elementary school. So, from a very early age, it was, if your mom's a teacher, anyone you know is a teacher, it's like they kind of can't really turn that off. So, she loved to read with us. I like love reading to this day, and I credit most of that to her. But we spent all of our time outside. Like, we were always outside. We weren't allowed to say we were bored because that word wasn't allowed. And so every weekend I was with them and we were just doing everything from like growing our own gardens to going on like nature hikes to just being outdoors and together. And I love being outside. I mean, a lot of my career now is based in like, the aquaculture industry in Maine. And I credit a lot to that from an early age, just being out there with them the whole time.
Maine is such a cool place. That's such a cool way to grow
I
up.
know. Yeah, it's the best. I'm biased, but it's the best.
Yeah. So it's somebody who's like becomes, or is Miss Basketball for an entire state and all that sort of stuff. It's easy to get wrapped up in that, but it seems like that wasn't a thing. And a big part of that was just family and upbringing and being pushed to have a lot of different interests and not solely focused on that. And then once you got to college, oh, go ahead.
No, I think you're right, and I think also though, and you probably experienced this too, it's like Maine's a pretty small state, and so I think my parents always pushed me to go try to experience new and different things, and so being able to, for example, like play on a club team that traveled all across the country to play, it's like you were always just experiencing situations that made you realize there's more to achieve or more you could be doing or you could be better at XYZ. So I think this constant growth kind of mindset, you're just never really satisfied with what you're doing. And there's always something next that you can be benching yourself against. So I was lucky to experience that in high school with basketball. So it's a bit of that too, I think.
Yeah. So then with that growth mindset, you get to go to Boston College. You have an awesome athletic career there. College ends, and it seems like things just kept rolling. What were you up to after college?
Yeah, so I really didn't know what I wanted to do after college. I was a communications major, which was great because it was so broad, but it also was a little bit overwhelming with kind of the options out there. And I went and started working for E&J Gallo Winery. So they have a sales development program, and that felt really natural. I mean, they recruit athletes pretty heavily for it, and it was I think, a really nice stepping stone into the professional world because it still felt, I was working with all fellow athletes. It felt like you were joining a team. There was a lot of, competition within the role, but ultimately it was a sales role. And I had another role there too, but I very quickly realized I didn't want to be in sales, even though I think even to them it was surprising because I think a lot of times people that have the athletic careers that we did, sales is a really great fit for them and they really excel in it and find a lot of mutual value, the company and the person. And it just wasn't for me. So I kind of did a really big pivot after a couple years there and moved into software. And so I started at a software company in Boston and I spent 6 years there and it was the best experience. I worked everything from like customer facing roles to product roles. And I credit a lot of kind of professional development with my time at Solsify because I was just constantly around people that were so much smarter than me and operators that pushed me professionally and also let me step into roles when on paper I didn't necessarily look like I had all of the skills, but they knew or challenged me to step into it and had faith in me. So those are the kind of like two areas that I was in immediately post grad. And at one of them for a decent amount of time. 6 years nowadays is a long time to spend somewhere. Yeah.
Nice. Sales roles are such a good fit for athletes, and that's what I'd had been doing. But kind
Mhm.
of similarly, I think it's easy in that you make a good amount of money usually, and it's fitting because it is kind of like if I do the work, I'll get the result usually.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think from the conversations I've been having, it does seem like people get to a certain point and they're kind of like, well, what's next? And that's cool. You found another role that allowed you to do a bunch of different things.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I think I was really lucky at, like, the stage of the company when I joined was really small, and then over the course of the 6 years, I got to watch it grow, so I also got to analyze myself, like, what type of companies do I like to be at? Do I like to be small and building, or do I like to be larger and operating? And I just got so many versions of a career within that time window that I got to try on a lot of different things and see which one felt better to me than others.
Were you able to kind of tie together what you had saw growing up from your parents' businesses and your grandparents to that experience of the company you're working for growing?
Yeah. It's really funny because I mean, it's probably typical, but when you're in something, you're obviously not grasping how, like, you look back and it all makes sense. And when you're in it, it makes absolutely none. The feedback I would always get at Solsify was that I was very entrepreneurial, that I treated all of the work I was doing as if it were my own mini business, and that I was able to really, like, lead, which I do think stems actually from the athletic side, but lead even when I wasn't necessarily in, like, a managerial role. And I think, like, when I would get that feedback, it's like, "Entrepreneurial, I mean, to me, it's just, like, how I kind of exist in the world, but, yeah, I think other people started noticing it before I did, to be honest with you.
How did the leadership tie back to sports?
I think just for better or for worse, I think I go into most situations feeling a responsibility for the people that I am working with or for, meaning, if it's a customer or if it's someone internally on my team. And that could be as simple as like making sure everyone has what they need before walking into a meeting, or making sure that I'm kind of getting out ahead of what I think a customer might ask and prepping our team internally, and just relationship building and knowing what motivates folks and what they want to get out of a situation. I think all that stems back to just, we were for 4 years basically in this mini family of a team, and I was the captain my senior year, and like that's your whole job, is to do those things. So I think it's just, again, for better or for worse, like ingrained at this point.
Yeah. I think high level athletes are really intuitive too. Like you are in practices with people who are trying as hard as they can. You're doing things at a really high level. And so you are able to kind of see people
Mhm.
for what they are. If somebody can't cut it, they can't cut it. And I think you start to kind of notice that stuff. And so I think that ties into business and maybe a little bit about what you're saying, which is like understanding what people need around you and being able to prep and get ahead of things. It sounds like the company you were at was really supportive of you. And it sounds like it gave you a lot of opportunities to grow. And it seems like those were things that kind of interest you. But eventually you ended up deciding that it was time to move on. What went into
Mhm.
that decision?
A lot went into that decision, and I on paper had it like really, really good at that company, and I cannot say enough good things about Salsify. But ultimately, at that time, I had a couple big life events happening, and then also just a kind of interest that wouldn't it had been quiet for a really long time, and then it just kept getting louder and louder, and it ended up kind of colliding with these life events that I'll tell you about. Um, I was still in Boston. I had just had my daughter, so I'd just come back from maternity leave. Um, and when she was 8 months old, so I had been back for about 4 months, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so that experience obviously just throws you into a tailspin personally, and physically, just treatment and all that jazz. So those pieces, my daughter and my cancer, really just forced me to start reflecting on like, you have a finite amount of time here on this planet. I think you end up learning a lot of these lessons, thankfully for most people when they're, you know, 60 and retiring. And I just kind of pull forward all of that learning through an unfortunate diagnosis. But that diagnosis did ultimately give me such a perspective shift on what I want to be spending my time doing, what I want to be contributing with my work, where I want to live, how I want to live. It just gave me the freedom, honestly, to answer those questions honestly. And where I ended up landing was I really I loved the people that I worked with and I loved the customers I was working with, but ultimately like what gets me out of bed in the morning isn't e-commerce. Like that's just not what I am like super passionate about, and that's ultimately what the software was focused around. And I couldn't see myself wanting to climb any ladder that was in front of me. Like I didn't want to be anyone at that company. And like I didn't want to be our chief product officer. I didn't want to be the head of, services. Like it wasn't I just didn't feel that. And so I thought about what do I want to be? And then at the same time, I had been like I said, I'm from Maine and I had been watching this like seaweed industry for a while, like over 5 years, because I just was obsessed with it. I thought it was so awesome that these fishermen, which is a huge industry in Maine, could use their know-how, their existing infrastructure like boats, all their gear, and their off season to be able to generate extra cash. I just thought it was a really creative workforce development tool and like economic driver. And I just love those situations where it's something simple, but it can have such this like huge impact on, a super rural state that has a lot of challenges economically. But I had no way of getting involved in that. Like, I have there is zero overlap in what I was doing professionally. I don't have a biology degree. I don't even I literally don't know how to drive a boat. So there's like no point that I could be like, oh, that made sense. But I just couldn't get out of my head. And so when I was doing all this reflecting, I was thinking to myself, there's all this seaweed and they're so successful at it, but there's not a lot of off takers. Like there's not a lot to do with it. What could we do with it? And then really from there, it's what we've been doing. It's turning it into material that can replace plastic. And so it just kind of got the ball rolling and then I haven't looked back really.
Yeah. So I would imagine that if you get diagnosed with cancer, you probably have to like pause. You
Yeah.
have to heal and all of those things. Did you have to take time away from your role? Did you just quit? What was that like? Was it a situation where at a certain point felt like you could start a business and you decided you wanted to do that? Were you sick and starting a business and it just kept snowballing?
Yeah, it was a bit of all of those things. So I technically founded the business at the end of December 2023. So it was a little bit before I got diagnosed. I got diagnosed in February. And it was mostly I was thinking to myself, okay, I'm gonna like I'd had my daughter. I had started having all these thoughts I was telling you. I was like, I'm gonna do this on nights and weekends and see if there's a there. And then I got diagnosed and I was like, all right, I really got to do this for all the reasons we just talked about. And I took a leave of absence from work, and their benefits in general were great, but the whole team there was just so supportive. And how they acted is how you would hope a company would act, but I know that that's not the case for everyone. And I'm super grateful that they were amazing and supportive through that period. I took a medical leave of absence, and I basically worked on Dirigo the whole time I was in treatment. I think which they probably won't love to hear, whatever. I was working on it like when I was sitting in my chemo chair. I was working on it all the time. And I don't say that to be like, like a toxic work ethic. Like I think those are very real. It was actually very healing for me. It was nice and distracting. It was super optimistic. It made me feel like I had, things ahead of me that I was looking forward to. And it just took my mind out of what was really scary at the time. So yes, I started it when I was sick and I grew it while I was sick. And then yeah, it just kind of kept going. It was kind of wild now looking back that happened, but that's what happened.
Amazing. It's been fun following along. Like I've been following you, I think through like LinkedIn maybe. But yeah, it seems like it's just kind of naturally continued to gather pace. It seems like you have found grants and incubators and so on and so forth, and you've been able to kind of like roll things into the next. And so I guess with cancer, like you mentioned a lot of different things, but like, I guess what was that like to have to pause? And then like, what did that experience teach you?
Where to start? So pausing, it's really interesting. I actually think when I got diagnosed, I wouldn't say that I've actually had that feeling of pause until recently. Your first year after being diagnosed, you're kind of just thrown into this state that I actually think I operate really well in, but it's constant decision making. It's constant like, what's next? What's the treatment plan? Evaluating, clinical trials, all of these things. So you're kind of like, there's a lot going on that's very, all-encompassing and also distracting because you feel like you're taking action, and for me, that was comforting. There are moments where you just totally crash out, and, like, I've never been a napper or someone that can't just, like, put I mean, I think you kinda get trained through sports to not you're hyper attuned to your body in some ways, but then you're also hyper attuned to just being able to like turn things off and disassociate and push through and push. And so I couldn't do that anymore. Like I physically couldn't do it. And so I was very humbled by my body in that process. And I started to listen to it in a way that I've never listened to it before. But only recently has it really hit me, like, once I'm out of treatment, and a lot of people that have been sick, like, can probably tell you this too, but once you're done with the decisions and they kind of kick you out to the, like, "We're gonna see you every year" stage, you're just sitting there and you're like, "That's it? Like, this huge thing just happened, and now I just, like, go back to normal." That's the period I felt a lot more pause in. What it's taught me, though, is I think ultimately so I, like, watch way too much Frozen because my daughter's 2.5, and that's, like, all we watch. But in Frozen 2, Anna goes through this, like, major anxiety attack, and I'm kinda like, "I don't know if 2-year-olds should be watching this," but as the mom, it makes a ton of sense, and, like, in this period, she talks about just taking the next right step or doing the next right thing, and for me, that's been a total unlock. Like, it's just allowed me to, like, really focus on what's in front of me and take all of the pressure off of, like, "Well, what if this doesn't go right?" Or what's this gonna be in a couple years?" Or I just take the next right step and then the next one, and then by the time you look back, you've walked a mile, but really you've just you've broken it down for yourself. And also then all the, cliche stuff, life's short, you should be with your family. I kind of stopped giving a shit about like what people think of me or like how I'm being perceived. I think I just operate with like, this is my intention and like that's all I can control. And yeah, it's just a bunch of stuff that I feel like you get to when you're older. But I feel like because I had it smack me in the face, I just have felt it sooner than probably everyone will feel it.
As soon as I asked my question, I was like, there's no way she's been able to pause. She started a business, she had a kid at the same time.
Yeah. Honestly, though, I don't know. I don't know if I would have been capable of pausing, honestly. I don't know if I had what was in me to like really look at a lot of what I needed to in the face. I think I was self-protective in my busyness. And I think now I'm getting to the point where like I can mentally handle a lot of this pause, but I don't think I would have been able to handle that a year ago. Which is why, yeah, I started a business. I have my 2-year-old. Like it was different, but yeah.
It's been like balancing a business and a kid.
If you ask me, I think it makes you a better business person, just like I think sports prepare you really well for the working world. I think I am like very good at prioritizing what needs to get done because, I can be in a meeting at 9:30 after I drop her off at 9 and I can be in a meeting until 4 and then I have to go pick her up. And so that window of time is so precious to me that it's only really important stuff is getting focused on in that time period. I definitely have a hard time compartmentalizing. So, like, I have to physically leave my phone downstairs and, like, leave my computer downstairs when I'm with her and we're up in her playroom because I love what I do. And so I could do it all day if I wanted to. And that's just not good for her or for me, honestly. And then there's times that you, like, totally mom guilt yourself out of like I went to Seattle for a work thing and I felt like so bad the entire time I was gone and in reality it's like she's having a great time with her dad and like at school, but you just feel like I should be there and I'm not there. But then there's the like external view. Like we're like deciding if we want to raise and et cetera. And I've had, certain VCs, say, like, how would you be a mom and run this business in a very, like, critical way? And that vibe still exists out there, but I just take the opinion that, like, it makes you better at it, it just looks different.
What reaction do you get with that answer?
It's a lot of, like, "Okay, maybe." Yeah, it's not a full on like, "Okay, yeah," and honestly, a lot of their concerns are probably valid. It's I don't think it's a super simple answer. I just know for myself, like, I can answer that it makes me better. But yeah, it means that I have really weird timestamps on my emails, and maybe I'm not at a desk exactly at 9, but also be there later. So it's all different, but I think it gets you to the same point ultimately.
I read your Substack from, I think you had just harvested like your first crop of seaweed at Dorigo Sea Farm. And you had tied cancer into what you're doing now at Dorigo Sea Farm with plastics within different products and
Yeah.
being able to replace those plastics with like a bioplastic.
Mhm.
Was that something that you had like thought of prior to cancer? Was that something that was brought to you as like you're starting to link these two things together and here's an influence I could have? And what was it like? Maybe it's when reading that, it felt like an epiphany of like, here's my spot
Mhm.
within this, marine economy.
Mhm. It really I mean, no, I think reading it, you're spot on. I think it was just this, like, intersection of all of these areas because when I was pregnant with my daughter, that was my first exposure to microplastic contamination, was reading I mean, you're just reading so much stuff when you're pregnant. You're, like, consuming all of these new horrific things to be worried about, and then one of them was microplastic and just how there was new research showing it was in, 90% of placenta samples tested and 100% of breast milk samples tested, and I just for some reason couldn't get it out of my head that, like, plastic had met her and I hadn't met her. Like, that was crazy to me. I didn't do anything about it at that point, but that was kind of the seed, and then when I was diagnosed I had already kinda started year ago. I was thinking, "Okay, we're gonna be a kelp farm. This is gonna be great. I'll do it on the side," and then when I started realizing, like, "Oh, there's actually not a lot of uses for this seaweed in Maine right now except food," they have excess. That was the same point I was learning that I was being diagnosed and I don't have, they would test me for the genetic predispositions that they know of. I didn't have those. I was 29, so like definitely not in the range that people usually get hormonal positive breast cancer. I had just had a baby, which is actually supposed to really help you not get breast cancer, statistically speaking. Um, all these things. And so all of these things, when you put me on a statistical analysis, you would not have said, "Oh, yeah, she's on track for that." And so my doctors would talk about environmental causations of disease, and I had never thought about that. Like I'm 29, I just had a kid, I'm like relatively healthy. I was a D1 athlete, like nothing would really think, yeah, she's poised for that. And so that had me go back to just, okay, what's at kind of this like center of chronic disease and I was peeling back the layers, then it's chronic inflammation. How do you get chronic inflammation? You get that in a lot of different ways. But one of the ways was we don't really know what this plastic does when it builds up in our bodies. Ultimately, you can't directly tie it to cancer or breast cancer, but you can tie it to bioaccumulation leading to chronic inflammation. And so I was already freaked out because I had my daughter. Now I had this new data point, and then I had this seaweed problem. And I was like, okay, well, can the seaweed replace this harmful thing? And so we started prototyping that. And then that was really what ended up being the genesis of the material platform that we have now.
When you're, I guess, what does the process look like from like, I guess, a person with a boat plants seaweed? Where do you all come
Yeah.
in? And then where do you leave off?
We buy from fishermen that go out and like harvest the seaweed. And the seaweed is basically grown. It's not you can wild harvest seaweed, which we do have some supply contracts where folks are wild harvesting. So we have that supply chain, but the supply chain that is the grown seaweed, they go out, they put an underwater, basically clothesline, I call it, on 10 feet of water. So it's submerged 10 feet. They grow the seaweed on that line. They plant it in the winter, they harvest in the spring. So they bring in that seaweed. Basically, you have to get the seaweed back to like basic compounds, essentially. And so it goes through a refining process and you get the compounds you need And then we basically create this giant like slurry, kind of like the paper pulper industry. And so we get this slurry that has all of the inputs we need to be able to make the material have the mechanical properties that we're looking for. And so that's kind of like our secret sauce of figuring out what needs to be in that slurry. And then we work with existing plastic manufacturers that have the machinery to basically take that slurry and either turn it into pellets, which is how plastic is made. It's just these little like resin pellets. So they can either turn it into that or they can just put it directly into a film. And so we give that to them. They work with us on making that. And then those rolls ultimately are shipped out to our customers. And there's a kind of different applications they can go into, but we're really at that like transitional step from raw ingredient to finished material.
And for like clients and customers, like who ends up using your finished material?
Yeah, so our first application is a replacement for what's called polyvinyl alcohol or PVA or PVOH if you see it on ingredient labels. It's in things from, skincare products to things like laundry and dish pods. So that wrapping that goes around the detergent, that's PVA. And so we are replacing that plastic film with our seaweed-based film. And so our first customer is like a laundry brand that will create those pods. And then we have additional customers that are in like the home garden space who want to basically have some form of a film or a sheet that can carry fertilizer to until it disintegrates in water and then use that for watering your plants. So that's a brand that is a home garden brand that's purchasing the film we have just with a little bit of a different take on it.
Do you still play basketball?
Very sparingly. I came out of retirement last year because one of my old teammates had a charity event she wanted us to play in. So me and Nicole and Katie went and played in a 3-on-3 tournament and we lost in the championship, which was devastating. But that was so fun. I'm considering joining a league with my husband because he was actually on our practice team at BC.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he's asked me to do that, but I'm like, I don't know. We'll see. I'll probably end up doing it, but childcare dependent.
Yeah. I guess I've been kind of trying to put, I guess, like a label on what like sports is for most people. And so some of the stuff that I've been studying are like the benefits of having hobbies and that sort of thing. And I think I've kind of got 3 buckets now. So there's like a hobby, which is something that's done for pleasure on your own time. There's a practice, which is something that's done for more like self-fulfillment. It's got like a real focus around improvement and like an evolution, self-evolution sort of take. And then there's profession. You have a job, you do it for, money and your livelihood. And so I think sports for most people ends up kind of falling into that like practice sort of bucket. It's not really a hobby. People are competitive about it. They want to get better at it. Some people it's a hobby, but I think most people it's like a practice. And so for somebody who's played sports at a Division I level, it might have even been a profession if you had a scholarship or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But then that ends. And so I've been kind of curious with like, how do people replace that? Or like, what is it like kind of losing that? And so I'm curious, like, what was sports like for you? Like, do you think it falls into one of those buckets? And then with whatever bucket it falls in, like, do you still have something like that filling a space in your life?
Yeah, I think it was definitely the practice bucket. I think you're right. I think that ultimately I think that unfortunately or fortunately, I think most things I do in my life are probably also falling into that practice realm. Like I do want to be getting better at what I'm doing. I think that constant focus on improvement and growth is just the through line through most things that I end up finding myself doing. I think work is a really one-to-one match for it right now. I'm always being thrown into situations that I've never been in before. I'm having to navigate skill gaps that I have and working on honing those or just developing them. And I mean, being a parent, that's also definitely a practice. So I would say that. And then honestly, I don't do a whole lot more right now. I'm trying to do meditation and it is so freaking hard. Like I am not built to meditate, but that has actually been one of the most like life-changing practices ever, but it's really hard for me. I think
What
people
kind of
think you're just like
meditation?
calm. I basically just do the ones that you're like, I don't know, it's like a box and you're just like breathing through the four corners the whole time. It's like breath work, I guess you could
Yeah.
call it. I am not a I do not know the lingo. I just have read some books and have some friends that are helping me.
What brought that up?
The inability to pause and the recognition that I don't listen to real-time feedback either from my mind or from my body, and not liking that I couldn't do either of those things and then wanting to be able to do them. And just belief that most of the people that I meet that meditate or have told me that they do breath work or things like that are people that I would aspire to be like. They are some of the most grounded, sound, sure of themselves people. And those are qualities that I would love to be able to have. So, bit of all those things.
How long have you been trying to do that for?
Like 6 months, I'd say.
Okay. So it's not
Yeah.
new. It's been a little bit.
Still feels really new. It's really hard. Like, I think people think you just sit there and you're like, and it's like, it's a mental workout to try to get yourself to do it.
Yeah. I try and do it every day. And I miss days, but I always feel much, much better when I do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you had any takeaways yet?
I think it's okay to sit and feel or think about things without taking action or having a conclusion, and that is a phase in and of itself, and to give it time and credit. And I don't think I did that before.
Yeah. I had a friend in college who was really into mental health. You
Hmm.
probably knew him, Nick Corliss.
Hmm.
He was
That
like on a
sounds
soccer
familiar. Yeah.
team. He's from New
Hmm.
Zealand. But yeah, he
Nice.
showed me meditation videos. And yeah, I remember just having a moment of like being incredibly stressed out, being like upset about things in my personal life. And he had like a video, it was like a YouTube video, and I was just breathing. And he just kind of sat there and like, I don't know, he came away with the conclusion that like, I'm upset about all of these things, but I can't do anything about them. Um, and for whatever reason, the context and whatnot just worked. And so
Hmm.
since then, I've tried to do it kind of like pretty constantly. I think that's usually the takeaway. It's like all these things that are running through my head are things that I can't control right now. I can't fix this in the moment. And so, what's the point of kind of stressing about it? Or maybe I can do
Exactly.
something and here's what I can do about it. So, make sure that you do it.
Hmm. Hmm. No, it gives you the space, I think, to have those realizations and to yeah, just the space to respond and think clearly about them. So yeah.
Nice. That's cool. Did you end up doing any like therapy or anything like that when you were going through cancer and that whole period?
I have been in therapy for 9 years now, and I think one of the things that I'm so, 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 so grateful for is that when shit hit the fan in the way that it did, I had 2 systems in place that were sound and stable, and one of them was my own therapy, like mental health. Like, I had already had that established. I had a really trusted relationship. I was already in the middle of doing a lot of hard work with just, having a baby just brings up a ton of stuff. I had some postpartum stuff. And so I was already in the thick of just like digging in. And then on top of it, I had really great childcare for my daughter. And so those 2 systems allowed me to be supported and feel confident in the support I was getting while I was dealing with new things that I didn't know how to navigate. And obviously, the childcare was the biggest thing because I just didn't have to worry about my daughter being taken care of or experiencing something negatively when I was trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
But yes, I
That's so
have been
cool.
in therapy.
That's awesome. Yeah. This is like kind of a weird question that has been more of like just a thought that I've had. Like the all of these conversations, like some of the themes that I've started to take, and I've really only had like 4 or 5 interviews so far,
Mhm.
is that the women all seem like they're really that I've talked to well prepared for kind of like a transition after sports. And I have kind of like 2 theories on why that might be. I think women are just in general like better at sharing and talking about things. And so I think if there is a moment of transition that's happening, I think they share it with their friends and they talk about it. And I think guys, it seems like don't really
Mm.
do that. And so there's almost like, I guess within sports for guys, to being an individual, being somebody who is strong and all of that, helps them be successful. And then once they get out of sports, it's kind of like that isn't as self-serving. And so they have to kind of learn to share again. But I guess another theory that I've had, and I'm curious what you think, is I think women's professional sports is just now kind of becoming an actual option.
Mhm,
Like in talking with
mhm.
Steph was like, I was one of the top 1% of the 1% of women's soccer players in the world, and I was making $20,000 a year. Uh, and so, like, that's not feasible. And if she's going to go be a banker at Goldman Sachs, like, those two things are not equivalent as far
Mhm.
as compensation goes. And so I'm curious, like, if growing up, being a professional athlete, which like for me was always the goal. And for all of the guys I've chatted with, like they're all like, yeah, I wanted to be a professional athlete. And a lot of them achieved that. That was the goal. If that was the goal for you, or if because of kind of where women's sports was at when we were growing up, if that wasn't necessarily a goal, it was, fun and you wanted to progress it as far as you could, but maybe in talking with you, it seems like maybe more of like a means to an end of like, getting an education, getting fulfillment out of it, but not necessarily like this will become my livelihood.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I mean, I used to describe basketball as this like vehicle, this bus that I could jump on that would take me to places that I would never get to see or experience if it weren't for it. But I mean, I was very open in college that like I want to go into a career path that is stable, lets me grow, and also lets me make real money. And none of those things like, you can't check any of those things off if you were to go play even now, honestly, if you were to go play in the WNBA. I mean, there are some people that they have checked that off, but for the majority of people, that wouldn't be the case. And also, even if you were to go play overseas, it's like you still make more often than you would in the WNBA, but I didn't wanna go live in I mean, my friend Nicole, I don't remember where she went and lived, totally blanking, it was somewhere in Europe, but I was like, "I don't wanna go do that." Like, I've been away from my family for holidays for 4 years, like, I wanna see my family. And again, you're it's not really an equal trade-off if it becomes the monetary piece, and I didn't do basketball for that either. I did basketball for all those other reasons, and those felt like they went out the window. So, I think it's that. I will say, though, about your first point about sharing, do you think you're right that we share more? But it's a lot of the blind leading the blind. Like, I don't think it's there's, like, openness, but there's also a lot of, like, what are how do you do this? And, like, who's done this well after graduation? And honestly, I found it really hard to find people that had gone out and, like, made careers and could really, like, bond with me over that shared lack of identity. And I think a lot of reasons I think that's a lot of reasons that people I think there are a lot of coaches and a lot of people that, played and go into it because they are really talented at the game and they stay in that world. But I think there's a lot of people that stay in that world because it's familiar and it's really hard to figure out what to do after. And I would just always hope that staying in that world is a choice and a thing you really are passionate and like talented at and want to keep doing versus feeling like, I don't know, maybe I'll just, coach. And that's where I struggled to find people that like could help me in that phase because it's just none of the systems are set up to like get you a job after. All those systems are set up to make sure that you're like performing. And I'm not saying they have to be, but it's a really big gap for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another theme is like all of the systems within sports are set up to help you be successful within that sport now. There isn't really a lot of afterthought to, what comes next. And it seems like that kind of makes sense on a certain level because most people within sports aren't, the 1% of the 1%, they're working as hard as they can to have every single edge to be successful and to kind of like raise your hand and say, I'm thinking about, what comes next. And it's not sports is in a lot of people's mind, raising your hand and saying like, I'm kind of tapping out.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And so that's a space where I think there is room for like growth within sports. And somebody like Steph, it's interesting chatting with her because she has bought a women's soccer team in England. And one
Cool.
of her comments, yeah, she bought this team, Leighton Orient. One of her comments was, all of these women on the team have the same exact personality types as the people that I was working with at Goldman Sachs. They're all killers in her own
Mhm.
word, but they've dedicated their whole life to soccer and education for them is done. So one of the ways she's trying to differentiate their offering as a team is helping out with finding jobs and getting a second
Mhm.
income and having, food and housing and all of that sort of stuff. And it seems like it's working. And so
That's
it's like, how do you kind
crazy.
of bring that stuff forward to while people are still playing so that they don't end up in that situation where they finish up their career and they're sitting there kind of like, what do I do? Feeling a little bit lost.
Definitely. And you're getting, I think it would benefit everyone because you're getting the folks that are, to her point, the killers or the people that are like, I am choosing to do this for all of the reasons that are going to make me and the team successful. And you're going to get the top people that way,
Yeah.
which is what everyone wants.
Yeah. Earlier in this conversation, you kind of talked about how other people knew you as a basketball player, but
Hmm.
that you always felt like you were kind of well rounded and there were all these other things on top of being a basketball player. But it also sounds like when basketball ended, maybe you went through a period of feeling a little bit lost.
Yeah.
I guess what was it like ending your basketball career? What was it like finding your next job, whatever came after that?
I would say that at the time, I felt like I was ready to like move on to the next phase, but that didn't make the next phase any easier. I think I really struggled to make relationships with, and I think probably everyone has a version of this, but you get so close with your team. Some of that's amazing. Some of that you probably don't need to be that close, but it is what it is. And so then when you leave and you're like, oh, I am just an individual orbiting now. There is no like group that I belong to or a default group of people that I will spend time with. That in and of itself is pretty unnerving. I don't think you're really alone often in college, and being alone was hard. And then I think just the milestones are so abstract and not as literal as they were in college or with sports. So that was somewhat alarming and hard to deal with. And then, I mean, even for me, like I've had a really hard time figuring out what like continuing to have physical movement and like athletics involved in my life looks like now because it was always so attached to like performing better on the court and that's not the case anymore. So then it's like then why do you do it? And I would say those are the biggest things. And then having so much time. Like you don't know what to do with the time because your time before was you'd go into the gym when it was sunny and you'd leave when it was dark and you worked basically a full-time job during the day. Yeah, I just had so much time. I like did not know what to do with it.
I think the community, like loss of community, is such a big aspect of
Mhm.
that transition. You go from being in this environment with people you know so well to
Mhm.
even at like the best company. It's really hard to recreate that sort of thing because you want to be,
Mhm.
appropriate, I guess. And in
Yeah.
my experience with
Yeah.
sports teams, it's like the most inappropriate environment
Yeah.
possible a lot of times.
Totally.
Yeah. For sports leading into, a career after sports and then, um, starting your own company, like, is there a common thread that you can kind of tie throughout?
I think I think that even if I didn't see the path in any of those 3 things, like sports, working in corporate, and then kinda starting my own thing. If I didn't see exactly how to get somewhere, but I had, like, an inkling that it was possible or maybe just a curiosity if it could be possible, in all of those situations, I've had a support network of people that I've had the courage to speak the thought out loud to, and then they've pushed me to say, "Why wouldn't you be able to do that?" And that has ultimately changed my entire life. Like, in basketball, I had people that said, like, "That is possible. Like, if you want it, go get it." And that that unlocked the ability for me to see it in myself. Same thing with work, like, at Salsify, I never thought I'd be in a like technical role or a semi-technical role as a product manager in a software company if you had told me that in college because that's not what I studied or anything. And I had people open up doors and be like, why couldn't that be you? Like, go do it. And then with entrepreneurship, like I have a very amazing support network between my husband and my family and close friends. And I was talking about this seaweed and they were like, can you stop talking about it and just go do it? Like, you'll figure it out. And in all those instances, I had these groups of people that kind of jump started me and allowed me to have the confidence to think I could do those things. And who knows, I like probably without them wouldn't have done many of them, if any. So, yeah, I'd say it's that. My group of people. They're pretty good.
It's awesome. And for Dorigo, or how do you say it? Dirigo?
Yeah, Dirigo. Dirigo.
Dirigo. Dirigo
Yeah.
Sea Farm. Like, where do you want it to be in 5, 10 years?
I want everybody to be able to see it or buy it if they want it. So that's, in Targets and Whole Foods and Walmarts. Like, I want this product to actually be used in everyday products that, you don't think about as contaminants, but they're not great right now. So I want you to be able to access it, and I want to be building in Maine and helping employ and prop up a lot of what makes Maine great. I just want to be able to give back to it because it's been a huge part of my life.
Awesome. And then I guess my last question for you is for somebody who's in that period of like a transition after sports, what advice would you give them?
I think take inventory of what's working or what has worked for you, what hasn't, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, and try to make that super like mushy analysis. Try to start giving it some shape by just having conversations with people that you think have expertise or could help you in some of those areas. People are really generous with their time, especially if you frame it in a way that's really pointed. And then I think it just goes back to like stop stressing out about like where you want to ultimately be and just do the next right thing. Just pick the next decision that gets you a little bit closer to where you think you want to be headed. And it's like what I said earlier, like you're going to feel like your path looks like this. And then ultimately, directionally, it all aligned to going one way, even if it felt really random at the time. So just have faith in that next right step and then just try to make it as informed as you can, but you'll get there for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining, Alexa. It's been so nice to
Yeah.
catch up.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.